Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Heidrick & Struggles, I'm delighted to once again be here at this fantastic event. The hospitality sector is one of those that we're very proud to be part of in our small way, supporting a variety of businesses and leaders within it. Future-proofing is a term that has been often bandied around pre the results of last week's referendum, but it's perhaps more relevant a challenge than ever. Businesses, and specifically leaders within these businesses, have to navigate potentially extraordinary amounts of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We spend an awful lot of our time talking to CEOs within the sector about how they retain, manage, and develop their teams to handle these challenges. And I'm delighted to have a panel of three senior leaders from different parts of the leisure and hospitality sector to engage in a discussion this afternoon. We have a number of topics that we will cover before I hope opening up to questions from the floor. But first, a couple of brief introductions. To my left, Alison. Alison is the Deputy Managing Director of Sky Business. She's responsible for looking after all of Sky Business's customers, which include the pub, hotel, and bookmaking sectors. She's been with Sky since 2002, joining the business in a treasury role before becoming Group Treasurer and Finance Director for Sky's Technology and Business divisions. She's also a Non-Executive Director at the British Film Institute. Ulrik Bengtsson is the President and CEO of Betsson, one of the leading gaming businesses that operates, I think, 20 brands across Europe, Latin America, and Central Asia. The business is truly international, with a team, I think, made up of over 40 different nationalities, with the majority based in Malta, Stockholm, and London. Betsson has arguably differentiated itself by being truly customer-centric, which may be something we discuss this afternoon. And I'm sure that Ulrik may, if he's willing, offer an interesting perspective given what happened last week. Ulrik's background is in a variety of different consumer businesses, including being chief executive of emerging markets for a Swedish media conglomerate and roles with Telenor and IBM. And at the end, Simon. Simon is Chief Executive of Enterprise Inns, the largest pub company in the UK, with around 5,000 properties, predominantly run as leased and tenanted pubs. The organisation is going through a significant amount of change, as over the next 5 years, the estate will transition to be more than just leased and tenanted, although they will remain at the core. The business's range of assets will evolve to include some commercial properties at one end, and at the other, operation of pubs between three managed house operating models. Simon became chief executive in 2014, having been promoted from group chief operating officer, but has been on the board since the early 2000s. Simon's also worked with a number of different businesses in the sector, including Rank, Allied Lions, and Whitbread. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel. So if we start on complexity, and complexity being sort of the new normal and unexpected challenges always around the corner, the first question would really just be to explore how you manage your businesses through this. And Ulrik, if I might start with you. You lead a business in an extremely competitive market segment that operates in a number of regions and a large proportion of Europe. I think UK, Denmark, Italy, Belgium, Sweden, and Estonia. How do you ensure that your team manages through this complexity?
I think with the huge amount of markets and on top of that various brands across very different regions, Central Asia, Latin America, clearly very different, I have found that it helps a lot to sort of relieving people from getting too boggled down that complexity and align groups and managers around something more purposeful. And in our case, we've really tried to align everyone, all nationalities, all brands, all countries around the customer, and try to keep that as the biggest focus in order to sort of avoid too many of the local variations of complexity. Because at the end of the day, surprisingly so, customers are actually pretty similar across regions. Some people sort of miss that point, but that's actually true. Customers are quite similar. So if we align everyone around a customer, that seems to relieve some of the complexity.
Okay. And Simon, if I come to you, given the transformation that enterprise is currently going through, at a point when the pub sector is transforming as well, how do you make sure that this complexity doesn't distract your leadership team from delivering, and how do you ensure that the transformation is kept on track?
Well, I find it quite ironic that I always felt that one of the most important roles of a chief executive was to hunt out complexity and remove it from a business to ensure the management team can stay very firmly focused. So it is somewhat ironic that I have introduced extreme levels of complexity in our business over the last 12 months, taking what was a single model business of tied, leased and tenancies throughout our entire estate, and now introducing additional operating models. And I need to be very clear, and we're very clear in the business, that we did not determine that the leased and tenanted operating model was wrong. It was just insufficient on its own to meet the very challenging nature of the marketplace in which we operate and the changing needs of consumers and the need for greater control on the retail propositions that we execute through our pubs, and to therefore have greater control on returns on our investment. But the leased and tenanted tied model will remain the very large part of our business for a very, very many years to come. And it has therefore been critical to make sure that the whole organisation stays attuned to running the tanker that we've recovered and restored into growth, and not losing sight of that growth and not losing that momentum, whilst continuing to develop the new business models. And our focus therefore has been on, my focus in particular, has been very much on the leadership behaviours that we exhibit throughout the group. That's not just the leadership team at the top of the group, but throughout the group. And having created this sort of new vision for the business, we've over-communicated constantly that story to try and make sure that everybody in the business has a compelling place to be and has a compelling part to play. Then we tried to resource it and make sure that people can see we're resourcing the vision, and then my job becomes to facilitate it and make sure that it doesn't move off track. So having perhaps tried very hard to make sure we were removing complexity wherever possible, my job, I think, has become one of facilitating complexity wherever possible.
Thank you. And Alison, coming to you, how do you ensure that your team at Sky Business are future-proofing your business?
Well, I think for Sky and Sky as a whole, rather than just taking Sky Business as a particular subsector of that, I think for us the whole concept of future-proofing revolves around how do we stay relevant to our customers, and how do we become more relevant to people who are not current customers or maybe are lapsed customers. And so, you know, the way that we have chosen to kind of work that through for Sky is we have a very formal program, and have had since Sky started over 20 years ago, a very formal program of what we call customer closeness. And there are kind of two purposes to this. One is to try to spot trends early, you know, how are customers' behaviors changing and what are the implications of that for us as a business. And the second is just an ongoing program of feedback into, you know, how customers view us and our product, how they view our customer service, dare I say, how they view our pricing, how would they like us to see content being packaged and bundled and sold. And so we have come at it from a perspective of really trying to stay close to our customers and not make decisions on important elements of our customer proposition in isolation, in a meeting room, you know, with no or little to no input from our customers. Because I think when a business, particularly a customer-dependent business like Sky, which is a discretionary choice for every household, and it's not just a one-off discretionary choice, it's an ongoing monthly discretionary choice, you know, so the need to remain relevant and a desired product is absolutely critical to our ongoing sustainability as a business. And so that program of customer engagement for us has had a number of very kind of tangible consequences then for the products that we have brought to market and the way that we engage with just the TV marketplace in general in the UK. So what started out as a one product business 25 years ago, which was largely selling pay TV sport, has now evolved into 4 different products, being television, obviously not just sport, critically across all genres of content. We sell broadband, we sell Wi-Fi, we're about to launch a mobile business, and we sell line rental. So a vast change in the products that we sell. If you take our core product, which is television, one of the consequences that engaging with both customers and non-customers has had for us is that we have segmented basically the marketplace in the UK. We have segmented the 27 million homes in the UK and tried to give them different products depending on what they want. So a couple of years ago we launched Now TV, which was a product designed for light users of premium television. It was designed for people who didn't want or couldn't have a satellite dish, or who didn't like the idea of being tied to a subscription. But it's a product that allows people to dip in and out when there is content on that is particularly relevant to them, and that is a product that's aimed at one subset. We have equally our Sky Plus HD, that is our fundamental core product, great technology, great content, and that is the product that we sell the most of. And then of course we have just launched Sky Q, which is really aimed at both premium lovers of content and those who are slightly more into their technology than the average household maybe. So those are just some examples of the consequences for us of engaging with customers in that way. And I think for us it will be just a fundamental pillar of how we choose to operate going forward. If you look at the behavior of young people, for example, the way in which they consume content is very different from the way that my generation consumes content. Very different. And so how do we stay close to them, particularly as they become homeowners and they become the ones who make a decision about how their household engages with television and Wi-Fi and broadband and the whole digital space. So it's just something that is fundamental to the way that Sky operates. I think it has served us well to date, and it's going to be critical going forward.
And that piece around product and making the right choices for customers is an interesting one. But if we move on to another component on that, which is the idea of businesses winning through some of the choices they make from a people perspective. I mean, Simon, you mentioned the role of the CEO. How do you and where do you put the top team and sort of broader talent agenda on your list of priorities?
Well, unsurprisingly, given the level of change that we are executing through the business, right at the top. And that has had to be addressed in three ways, really. Firstly, it's to ensure that the existing team can continue to grow their skill base, acquire new skills in order to compete even more effectively in the widest possible market scenarios that we face. Secondly, it's about bringing new skills into the business. And actually, that has meant we've had a recruitment task to undertake as we clearly undertake a number of new business areas where we might have knowledge, we might have contextual experience, and we might even have a lot of opinion, but we don't necessarily have the right skills to be able to execute those effectively. And then the third area is to ensure that wherever possible in our organization, we can redeploy existing talent and existing skills into new parts of the business. And I think that's particularly important at a time when we have built a huge amount of loyalty and a huge amount of experience in the business, and redeploying that now into new parts of business to which those individuals were perhaps not previously experienced has become a very important objective. But I think if there's one particular area that we are focused on right now, it's how to turn, and by the way, this is not my Brexit comment.
We'll come to that.
It's how to turn uncertainty into a strength rather than a concern. And bearing in mind we only launched our new strategic plan for the business a year ago, and it was a surprise to most of the people internally as it was to most audiences externally. We've had to deal with an extended period of uncertainty in which our own teams want to know what's in it for me, where do I fit, what's my role, how can my career develop in an organization that's going to be a very different shape to the one I perhaps first joined 10, 15 years ago. And what's become quite clear is that uncertainty, at least within the confines of one's own immediate market, is not necessarily a bad thing. And we've had examples where people have shown enormous creativity, enormous flair, and enormous invention and innovation in order to deal with what to us seemed like intractable problems. And it's the very nature of that doubt or that uncertainty that has actually unlocked some great skill and talent and enthusiasm within the existing organization. So balancing that with the acquisition of new skills and bringing in new talent to the business from outside has been a fascinating journey, and one that I think we're still only at the front end of.
And that journey, Ulrich, is probably more, well, from an innovation perspective, is clearly interesting in an organization that is at the cutting edge from a digital perspective, at a cutting edge from a multi-market perspective. What are your views from a talent perspective on how you can have the competitive advantage that you've got?
I think when it comes to attracting talent, we get almost 2,000 applications into our group per month. So there's one thing attracting in the top end of the funnel, but then you have, as you point out, Ben, very specific skills in the digital space, even in general marketing spaces that are much more complicated. And I'm sometimes surprised when I speak to even our own managers, when we have managers who don't really know what they're looking for. I think if you're going to attract talent, it has to start with, you got to know what you're looking for. And way too many times you fail on that first hurdle to be able to attract. You got to have a very, very clear picture of what capability do I actually need right now. And then when you identify that, the second bit is you got to have a story to tell. What's the value proposition? Why am I going to join this company? How am I going to be able to sort of, what is it going to bring to the talent? And in our case, we put a lot of emphasis on having an impact. And that then leads into how we retain talent, because I think retaining talent is people leave companies because they have bad managers. That's normally the case, possibly because of salary sometimes, but more normally it's because of bad managers. You got to put a lot of attention to the managers and how the managers work with their teams, and how the managers allow the individual to actually have an impact. Because when you get to situations where individuals don't feel they can have an impact, and they don't have a story they buy into, it's going to be really, really hard to attract those very specific and more sort of hard to come by talents in digital spaces and so forth. So I think somewhere there we found a formula that we work towards.
Okay. I might move on to the question of future-proofing, because when we talk to leaders, when we talk to CEOs, the conversation often evolves to one or two specific areas that are keeping them awake at night or are top of mind in terms of their respective business or the market segment that they operate in. So Alison, open question, what keeps you awake at night, or what's next for your business?
Well, look, Sky as a business has just been through a very large sort of transformational European acquisition. We have bought out the News Corporation interests in Sky Germany and Sky Italia, and have been very public and very sort of testing on ourselves about what we're trying to achieve and what the synergies are that we expect from the acquisition of those businesses. So actually, pausing to execute that really well is fundamental for us now going forward. Because I think there are probably two things that are critical for a business to really get right, and one is strategy and one is people. And of course a key pillar of strategy is not just the development of the right strategy, but the execution of it, as Simon will well know now. And so for us, pausing to actually get that right and move ahead and really land what we think we can land and develop our business in the way that we believe is possible is critical for us. And then, we have, as I said, we have just launched a new product and trying to get that really embedded into the business and making it a product that our customers love and value and continue to value is probably the second for us. But I think, the development and the retention of the right people in the right roles is always critical for any business. I think where Sky has really excelled actually in the past is on differentiating between career development and personal development, because I slightly disagree with Ulrich when he says that people leave the business because of bad managers. I don't believe that they do. I believe they leave a business when they stop developing, either because they see no road or because personally they have stopped developing, they've stopped learning, they go a bit stale and they think, actually, I'm bored now, I'm going to leave. And so we do, I think, a very good job of, in an environment where there isn't necessarily an obvious route to promotion, that is not, kind of where we stop. We talk and focus a lot on individuals' personal development and how you can continue to grow yourself despite the content of your role not necessarily changing fundamentally. So that is a key way that we look to retain people. And there are some people at Sky who have been there since we launched the business in 1992. Which is both an asset and a liability, because on the one hand, you don't want to lose someone who knows the business inside out. On the other, how can someone be on top of their game for 25 years, in what is quite a similar role? And the way that they do that is by feeling that they are continuously developing. So that to us is a key part of, I think, how we are going to look to grow.
Okay. And Ulrich, the question around, or the same question around, what keeps you awake at night?
It's partly the same answer, I think. It's the execution. It's always the execution, how we execute towards our customers, how we execute our strategy, because I think strategy are more as generic. It's all about how you execute that and how we execute in our product. And it always comes back to the execution, I think. And as Alison points out, the execution is the people. So then it inevitably gets into a question of, do we have the right managers? Do we have the right capabilities in place in the most critical functions?
Okay. And Simon, probably slightly different question. Top of your list on where or what next for the sector?
Well, I have to be honest, there have been occasions in the last year when sleep has been something of a luxury, because we have been quite busy. So we're very, very focused on what we're trying to execute in the business. And I suppose the thing that I just have to be wary of is that a strategy, a new plan for the business, is not a fixed, immovable object. And whilst we have to maintain massive focus on our own execution, we've got to keep our eyes wide and high across the business to make sure that we can keep full sight of what's going on around us, and making sure that our strategy evolves to the changing nature of the marketplace in which we're operating. So rigid execution, but with sufficient flexibility to make sure that we can evolve our strategy as is necessary over time. And for me personally, in the market in which we operate, and I'm bound to say this, aren't I, given where our business has come from, I think the customer journey, and in particular treating customers as individuals, has never been more important. And whilst there is a place for brands, and of course there is a place for concepts, I passionately believe that the authenticity with which we treat individual customers and their customer journey, making it very personal, very special, very personalised, and the whole role of such things as craft beer in the UK hospitality sector and local sourcing is all about making individual customers feel more valued, and that the businesses that we provide for their use are better reflecting their own individual circumstances and their own individual needs. And that for me is the evolving shape of the sector in which our own strategy has to be able to evolve to stay relevant.
It would be remiss of me not to put a question to the three of you on the impact or the results of the referendum. What are your thoughts on how it's going to impact your business going forward? Ulrich, I might pick on you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think as one of the principal beneficiaries of free flow of movement and free flow of services and goods across the European Union, being an online supplier of anything really, but maybe gaming in particular. Short term, we see very limited effect. Our business in the UK is quite small in comparison to the rest of our business still. But of course, long term, if the European idea falls apart and the free flow of services is restricted, has potential enormous effect for online in general, not only our industry. And I do not think I use too big of a word when I say enormous. I think it's a potential big problem, but we're not there yet, so we'll see.
Simon, Alison, any further comments?
Well, in the immediate term, I don't think there's any impact at all on our particular part of the sector. There's bound to be some sentiment concerns amongst members of staff who might now be worrying about their own personal future, staff who operate in our pubs, and there might be some concern amongst the pub operations teams about where we're going to get some staff from. But I think the real issue for us in our sector and for me in our business is to focus to an even greater extent on those things that we are in control of. We've got some pretty big headwinds to deal with coming around the corner with the impact of the national living wage and also with the whole apprenticeship levy and also the burden of VAT in our sector compared to other sectors. And I very much hope that at a time when the government and the opposition parties, whoever they are led by, are going to go through some fundamental changes themselves, I hope that they will seek to engage with our sector to a degree never done before. And when one considers that the national living wage and the apprenticeship levy were both brought in without consultation, I think this is a time when the government of whatever colour needs to engage and liaise even more extensively within the sector in order to help us deal with the headwinds that are already in play whilst we work our way through the next couple of years of uncertainty in the wider Brexit arena.
Alison?
Yeah, look, I think Simon is right. You know, ultimately in the short term, probably very little is likely to happen. I think for us as a business which has recently, you know, expanded into Europe, and we have done quite a lot about transferring expertise and staff between 3 regions, that probably becomes harder, which, you know, we'll deal with. It's a shame, but is something that obviously we will deal with. I think uniquely to Sky, or well, uniquely to our sector, it throws up some interesting questions around the Digital Act around Europe and the whole concept of intra-Europe copyright and rights being sold across Europe rather than individually in individual territories. You know, we obviously, for example, buy rights uniquely for the UK, Ireland, Italy and Germany, and it's quite fragmented. There were moves to selling rights on a more European basis, and quite what this move does for all of that, I think, obviously remains to be seen. So, you know, some challenges to come. I'm sure there at some point there will be opportunities as well. In the meantime, I think we just have to, you know, try to reassure people that in the short term nothing changes, and let's hope the position of the Irish is safe. She said selfishly.
Just conscious of time, I might just, if we can have the lights up, just to open up to any questions from the floor. If you could just put your hand up and just say your name and where you're from, that would be fantastic. Any questions? There's a gentleman in the middle.
No.
Jack from Flypay. So part of being prepared for the future would be the adoption of technology. Which new form of technology, be it booking or payment or reviews or data, even wider forms of data and marketing, do you think is most pivotal in solving your biggest problems upcoming, be it labour going up or, you know, cost of loyalty or understanding your customers?
Perhaps, Ulrich, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I'm almost religious about data. I think the power of data is by and large untapped. There is huge amount of potential in data, and I think, as we touched upon here, the real holy grail for us online is to be real-time relevant for every individual customer. And data will allow us to be much more relevant, much more real-time. And even though we have done a lot the last 2 years, there is still so much more that can be done, and especially the timeliness of how we use data has huge potential.
Another question? Any further questions from the floor? Gentleman in the middle.
How do you see what do you think a pub will look like in 20 years from now?
Simon, do you want to take that one?
Well, having addressed some of the wounds that will exist in communities now, whether they be families, villages or wider communities, I think the pub has got an even more relevant place to deal with the implications of last Friday's vote. I mean, quite frankly, it's transformed in the 30 years that I've been in the pub industry. And I think it is so much more about a wide array of characteristics, not necessarily pigeonholing customers into one place. Yes, there are sort of individual pubs that are more likely to focus on particular communities or particular behaviours. And I actually, although this is relatively new to us, I would concur with what Ulrich just said about the role of data. We have become an immensely data-hungry organisation in order to try and make better use of consumer insights to make sure that our pubs can be relevant to the communities in which they operate. So far from me to say what I think a pub might look like in 20 years' time. It'll be the use of consumer data and experiential data which helps us to make sure that individual pubs stay relevant to their local communities. The one thing I can be absolutely sure of is that there'll still be a role for the pub, and lots of them. And mine in particular.
Any final questions? If not, I'll just take this opportunity to thank all of you, and I think a round of applause to the panel.